When I lived in Mexico City at the end of the 1940s, it was a city of 1 million people. The sky, that special shade of blue that goes so well with circling vultures, blood.
Circling vultures, blood and sand. In 1949, it was a cheap place to live. My New Orleans case for heroin and marijuana possession looked so unpromising.
Decided not to show up for the court date. I knew that under the statute of limitations I could not return to the United States for 5 years. So I applied for Mexican citizenship. I thought I might go into farming or perhaps open a bar on the American border.
People would shit all over the street and lie down and sleep in it. Drunks slept right on the sidewalks.
Everyone in Mexico had mastered the art of minding his own business. It simply would not occur to a Mexican to expect criticism from a stranger, nor to criticize the behavior of others. It was sinister and gloomy and chaotic, with the special chaos of a dream.
The special chaos of a dream. A dream. The murder capital of the world. Per capita homicide rate.
Mexico City was also the murder capital of the world. Campesino is in from the country waiting for a bus. Sandals made from a tire, a wide sombrero, a machete at his...
The man is also waiting, dressed in a suit, looking at his wristwatch, muttering angrily. The campesino whips out his machete and cuts the man's head clean off. He later told police.
He was giving me looks muy feo.
And the next thing, a head rolls in the gutter, grimacing horribly and showing gold teeth. Picks up a rock.
Every country has its own special shits, like the southern lawman counting his nigger notches, and the sneering Mexican macho is certainly up there when it comes to sheer ugliness. And many of the Mexican middle class are about as awful as any bourgeoisie in the world. I remember that in Mexico the narcotic scripts were bright yellow, like $1,000 bill or a dishonorable discharge from the army. One time old Dave and I tried to fill such a script, which he had obtained quite legitimately from the Mexican government. The first pharmacist we hit jerked back, snarling, "No prestamos servicio a los viciosos." We do not serve dope fiends. From one pharmacia to another we walked, getting sicker with every step. We must have walked for miles. Never been in this neighborhood before. Well, let's try one more. Finally, we entered a tiny hole-in-the-wall pharmacia. I pulled out the receta, and a grey-haired lady smiled at me. The pharmacist looked at the script and said, 2 minutes, senor. We sat down to wait. There were geraniums in the window. A small boy brought me a glass of water, and a cat rubbed against my leg. The pharmacist returned with our morphine. Gracias, senor. Outside, the neighborhood now seemed enchanted. Little pharmacias in a market, stalls outside, a pulqueria on the corner, kiosks selling fried grasshoppers and peppermint candy black with flies. Boys in from the country in spotless white linen and fierce, innocent black eyes, like exotic animals of a dazzling, sexless beauty. Here is a boy with sharp features and black skin, smelling of vanilla, a gardenia behind his ear. Yes, you found a Johnson, but you waded through Shitville to find him. You always do. Just when you think the earth is exclusively populated by shits, you meet a Johnson.
Addict has little regard.
An addict has little
An addict has little regard for his image.
He wears the dirtiest, shabbiest clothes and feels no need to call attention to himself. During my period of addiction in Tangiers, I was known as El Hombre Invisible, the Invisible Man.
Disintegration of self-image often results in an indiscriminate image hunger.
In my first novel, Junkie, the protagonist Lee comes across as integrated and self-contained, sure of himself and where he is going. In Queer, he is disintegrated, desperately in need of contact, completely unsure of himself and of his purpose. The difference, of course, is simple. Lee on Junk is coveted, protected, and also severely limited. Not only does Junk short-circuit the sex drive, it also blunts emotional reactions to the vanishing point. Looking back over the action of Queer, that hallucinated month of acute withdrawal takes on a hellish glow of menace and evil, drifting out of neon-lit cocktail bars. The 45 always just under the surface. On Junk, I was insulated, didn't drink, didn't go out much, just shot up and waited for the next shot. When the cover is removed, everything that has been held in check by Junk spills out.
The ugly violence, the 45 always just under the surface.
The withdrawing addict is subject to the emotional excesses of a child, and the sex drive returns in full force. Men of 60 experience wet dreams and spontaneous orgasms, an extremely unpleasant experience. Unless the reader keeps this in mind, the metamorphosis of Lee's character will appear as inexplicable or psychotic. Lee has a phase of excessive drinking, which exacerbates all the worst and most dangerous aspects of the withdrawal sickness. Reckless, unseemly, outrageous, maudlin, in a word, appalling behavior. After withdrawal, the organism readjusts and stabilizes at a pre-junk level. In the narrative, this stabilization is finally reached during the South American trip. No junk is available, nor any other drug, after the paregoric of Panama. Lee's drinking has dwindled to several good stiff ones at sundown, not so different from the Lee of the later Yahe letters, except for the phantom presence of Allerton.
Junkie motivation for that was my experience as an addict.
I was hoping for publication, money, recognition.
I knew nothing about the writing business at the time.
My motivations to write Queer were more complex and are not clear to me at the present time.
I wish to chronicle so carefully these extremely painful and unpleasant and lacerating memories. I feel that I was being written in Queer.
While it was I who wrote Junkie, I feel that I was being written in Queer. I was also taking pains to ensure further writing so as to set the record straight. Writing as inoculation. As soon as something is written, it loses the power of surprise. So I achieved some immunity from further perilous ventures along these lines by writing my experiences down.
Queer. Set the record straight.
Writing as inoculation.
Writing as inoculation. Having returned from the insulation of Junk to the land of the living like a frantic, inept Lazarus, Lee seems determined to score.
At the beginning of the Queer manuscript fragment, having returned from the insulation of Junk to the land of the living, like a frantic, inept Lazarus, Lee seems determined to score, in the sexual sense of the word. There is something curiously systematic and unsexual about his quest for a suitable sex object, crossing one prospect after another off a list which seems compiled with ultimate failure in mind. On some deep, very deep level, he does not want to succeed, but will go to any length to avoid the realization that he is not really looking for sex contact.
Which seems compiled with ultimate failure in mind. The addict is indifferent to the impression he creates in others during withdrawal.
Compulsive need for an audience, and this is clearly what Lee seeks in Allerton. An audience, the acknowledgement of his performance, mask to cover a shocking disintegration. So he invents a frantic, attention-getting format which he calls the routine. The routine. It is an ancient mariner, and he stoppeth one of three.
Name of the ancient mariner. I shot the albatross. Is an ancient mariner, and he stoppeth one of three.
Ellipsis.
Performance takes the form of routines. Fantasies about chess players, the Texas oil man, cornhole Gus's used slave lot. In Queer, Lee addresses these routines to an actual audience.
Later, as he develops as a writer, the audience becomes internalized. The same mechanism that produced AJ and Dr. Benway is dedicated to Allerton, who is forced into the role of approving muse, in which he feels understandably uncomfortable. What Lee is looking for is contact or recognition. Lee does not know that he is already committed to writing.
Lee does not know that he is already committed.
The only way he has of making an indelible record, whether Allerton is inclined to observe or not. Lee is being inexorably pressed into the world of fiction. He has already made the choice between his life and his work.
Inexorably pressed into the world of fiction. He has already made the choice between his life and his work.
Unbridgeable distances, the defeat and weariness of a long, painful journey made for nothing, wrong turnings, the track lost, a bus waiting in the rain, back to Ambato, Quito, Panama, Mexico City. When I started to write this companion text to Queer, I was paralyzed with a heavy reluctance, a writer's block, like a straitjacket. I glance at the manuscript of Queer and feel I simply can't read it. My past was a poisoned river, from which one was fortunate to escape, and by which one feels immediately threatened, years after the events recorded. Painful to an extent I find it difficult to read, let alone to write about. The reason for this reluctance becomes clearer as I force myself to look. The book is motivated. My past was a poisoned river. Force myself to look.
The book is motivated and formed
by an event which is never mentioned, is carefully avoided. The accidental shooting death of my wife, Joan. September 1951.
Okay, he shot her on September the 6th, 1951. An event which is never mentioned, in fact, is carefully avoided.
The accidental shooting death
of my wife, Joan, in September 1951.
Joan Vollmer. 51 in Mexico City, that's when he shot her. Okay, Bill. While I was writing The Place of Dead Roads, I felt in spiritual contact with the late English writer Denton Welsh and modelled the novel's hero Kim Carson directly on him. Whole sections came to me as if dictated, like table tapping. So, every event of that morning is charged with special significance as if it were underlined. This portentous second sight permeates Welch's writing. I get exactly the same feeling to an almost unbearable degree as I read the manuscript of Queer. The event towards which Lee feels inexorably driven is the death of his wife by his own hand. The knowledge of a possession, a dead hand, waiting to slip over his like a glove.
His wife by his own hand.
So a smog of menace and evil rises from the pages.
Evil that Lee,
not knowing,
tries
to escape. With frantic flights of fantasy, his routines which set one's teeth on edge because of the ugly menace just behind or to one side of them. A presence palpable as a haze. Frantic flights of fantasy. Brian Geisen
said to me in Paris,
for Ugly Spirit, shot Joan because...
Ellipsis. Bit of media mediumistic message that was not completed. Or was it? Need to be completed if you read it.
Ugly Spirit shot Joan to because my concept of possession is closer to the medieval model than to modern psychological explanations, with their dogmatic insistence that such manifestations must come from within and never, never, never from without.
Modern psychological explanations with their dogmatic...
As if there were some clear-cut difference between inner and outer. I mean a definite possessing entity.
In 1939,
I became interested in Egyptian hieroglyphics and went out to see someone in the Department of Egyptology, and something was screaming in my ear. You don't belong here. You don't belong here. Hieroglyphics provided one key to the mechanism of possession. Clear indication of something in my being that was not me and not under my control.
Not under my control.
Control. I remember a dream from this period. In the dream I am floating up near the ceiling with a feeling of utter death and despair. And looking down I see my body walking out the door. With deadly purpose. One wonders if Yahweh could have saved the day by a blinding revelation.
I remember a cut-up I made in Paris years later.
Raw peeled winds of hate and mischance blew the shot. For years I thought this referred to blowing a shot of junk when the junk squirts out the side of the syringe or dropper owing to an obstruction. Brian Geisen pointed out the actual meaning. The shot that killed Joan.
The shot that killed Joan.
I had bought a scout knife in Quito, like something from a turn-of-the-century junk shop. It was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, a few days after I came back to Mexico City, and I decided to have the knife sharpened. The knife sharpener had a little whistle and a fixed route, and as I walked down the street towards his cart, a feeling of loss and sadness that had weighed on me all day so I could hardly breathe, intensified to such an extent that I found tears streaming down my face.
3 o'clock in the afternoon. What on earth is wrong, I wondered. This heavy depression and a feeling of doom occurs again and again in the text.
Lee usually attributes it to his failures with Allerton. Allerton has just refused a dinner invitation and left abruptly. Lee stared at the table, his thoughts slow, as if he were very cold. Bracket. Reading this, I am cold and depressed. Here is a precognitive dream from Cotter's shack. He was standing in front of the ship Ahoy. The place looked deserted. He could hear someone crying. He saw his little son and knelt down and took the child in his arms. The sound of crying came closer, a wave of sadness. He held little Willie close against his chest. A group of people was standing there in convict suits. Lee wondered what they were doing there and why he was crying.
I have constrained myself to remember the day of Joan's death.
I have constrained myself to remember the day of Joan's death. The overwhelming feeling of doom is... I am forced to the appalling conclusion that I would never have become a writer, but for Joan's death, and to a realization of the extent to which this event has motivated and formulated my writing. I live with the constant threat of possession and a constant need to escape from possession, from control. So, the death of Joan brought me in contact with the invader, the ugly spirit, and maneuvered me into a lifelong struggle in which I have had no choice except to write my way out.
Never would have become a writer but for Joan's death. This event has motivated and formulated my writing. Appalling conclusion that I would never have become a writer but for Joan's death.
With the constant threat of possession.
I
escape.
live with the constant threat of possession.
And a constant need to escape
I
from
live
possession.
with the possession.
Control.
To escape from
Control.
Control has a capital C. The death of Joan
Brought me in contact with the invader, the ugly spirit, maneuvered me into a lifelong struggle in which I have had no choice
except to
write my way out. Right.
And the final paragraph is in italics. I have constrained myself to escape death. Denton Welsh is almost my face.
What are you rewriting?
What are you rewriting? And virus.
A lifelong preoccupation with control and virus.
Preoccupation with control and virus.
Model of dogmatic insistence, never from without, was screaming in my ear.
Don't belong here.
You don't belong here.
Straight jacket notation, carefully paralysed with heavy reluctance.
To escape their pre-written lines years after the events recorded. A writer's block avoided Joan's death. Denton Welsh's Kim Carson's voice through a cloud underlined broken table tapping.
Burroughs.
February 1985.
February 1985. He wrote that in February of 1985. It is now 2025.
Here, this ready for you on February the 5th, Bill.
February of 2025 for you, Bill.
I love you, Bill.
And now the book starts.
And the book is called...
It's called Queer.
And the book is called Queer.
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 By William S Burroughs.
My beloved William S Burroughs for February the 5th, 2025. Happy birthday, Bill. I love you, Bill. I always have. And I always will. William S Burroughs.